The sound of high heels clicking against the polished marble floor echoed through the towering glass walls of Walker Enterprises. Employees scurried to their desks as the man at the center of it all strode past them without a glance. Ethan Walker, CEO and founder of the multi-billion-dollar tech empire, was a man who commanded respect and fear. He thrived in his meticulously controlled environment, where efficiency ruled and emotions had no place. Ethan stopped in front of his assistant's desk. Without breaking stride, he barked, "Did you confirm the investor dinner for tonight?" "Yes, Mr. Walker," his assistant replied, typing furiously. 7 p.m. at the Vercelli. Good. And cancel my morning meeting with the marketing team. I don't have time for their excuses. As he entered his corner office, Ethan took in the sweeping view of the city skyline. The sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the perfectly organized desk that symbolized his life. Everything about Ethan's world was immaculate, cold, and calculated. But perfection came with a cost. Ethan's relationships, what few he had, were transactional at best. His board of directors respected his results but despised his ruthless tactics. His employees admired his success but whispered about his arrogance. Even his family, once close, had grown distant, unable to break through the walls he had built. Ethan thrived on control, and to him, emotions were liabilities. He had no time for vulnerability, no patience for empathy. People were tools to be used and discarded when they outlived their purpose. At least, that's what he believed. The storm brewing in Ethan's life began quietly, as most storms do. His father, Robert Walker, had requested a meeting. Ethan hadn't seen his father in months, and the elder Walker's tone over the phone had been unusually firm. When Ethan arrived at the cafe, Robert was already seated, sipping his coffee. Despite his age, Robert carried himself with a quiet dignity. He was a man of integrity, known for his philanthropy and compassion, qualities that Ethan had long dismissed as weaknesses. "Ethan," Robert said, rising to greet his son. "Dad," Ethan replied curtly, sitting down without meeting his father's eyes. "What's this about? I have a tight schedule." Robert sighed, his expression weary but determined. "It's about you, son. And the path you're on." Ethan frowned. "What path?" "The one where you've forgotten what it means to be human," Robert said bluntly. "You've built an empire, but you've lost your way. Do you even know who you are anymore, Ethan? Or are you just a machine chasing profits?" Ethan bristled. "I didn't come here for a lecture." "No, you came here because you knew deep down that I'm right," Robert said, leaning forward. "You've cut yourself off from everyone who cares about you. Your employees fear you, your friends don't exist, and your family." "What about my family?" Ethan snapped. "Your family barely knows who you are anymore," Robert said softly. "And that includes me." The words hit harder than Ethan expected, but he masked his discomfort with his usual arrogance. "I'm not interested in playing the sentimental game, Dad. My job is to run a company, not make friends." Robert shook his head, his disappointment evident. "A company can't be your whole world, Ethan. One day you'll realize that. I just hope it's not too late." Ethan left the cafe feeling more unsettled than he cared to admit. He dismissed his father's words as the ramblings of an old man who didn't understand the demands of modern business. But a small, nagging voice in the back of his mind refused to be silenced. The breaking point came a week later, during a board meeting. Ethan's company had been hit with a scandal, allegations of unethical labor practices in one of their overseas factories. The news had gone viral, and the public backlash was swift and brutal. Investors were pulling out, and the company's stock was plummeting. "This is a PR nightmare," one board member said, his voice strained. "If we don't turn this around, we're going to lose everything." Ethan stood at the head of the table, his jaw clenched. "We'll handle it," he said, his tone sharp. "I'll issue a statement." "That won't be enough," another board member interjected. "Your reputation is part of the problem, Ethan. People see you as cold, unfeeling. They want someone they can believe in, someone human." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?" "We're suggesting," the board chair said cautiously, "that you soften your image. Do something that shows the world you're more than just a ruthless CEO." Ethan's lip curled in disdain. "You want me to put on a show?" "We want you to save the company," the chair replied. "And sometimes, saving the company means making personal sacrifices." That evening, as Ethan mulled over the board's words, an idea began to take shape. If they wanted a softer image, he'd give them one. A carefully curated relationship, a marriage even, could do wonders for his public persona. But it couldn't be just anyone. It had to be someone who would appeal to the public's emotions, someone who would make him look like a hero. And that's when he met Claire Bennett. Claire was everything Ethan wasn't. A music teacher who worked with underprivileged children, she was kind, warm, and fiercely independent despite being blind. She lived in a modest apartment and spent her free time volunteering at local shelters. Her life was a stark contrast to Ethan's world of luxury and power. Ethan met Claire at a fundraiser his PR team had insisted he attend. He spotted her across the room, her laughter brightening the air as she chatted with a group of children. She was beautiful, with a radiant smile that seemed to draw everyone in. For the first time in years, Ethan hesitated. There was something disarming about Claire, something he couldn't quite place. But he quickly shook off the feeling. This wasn't about her, it was about his plan. He approached her, his smile practiced and charming. "Claire Bennett, right? I've heard a lot about the work you do." Claire turned toward his voice, her head tilted slightly. "And you are?" "Ethan Walker," he said smoothly. "CEO of Walker Enterprises." Claire's expression shifted, her smile polite but guarded. "The famous businessman." "Guilty as charged," Ethan said, his tone light. "But tonight, I'm just here to support a good cause." "Is that so?" Claire asked, her tone teasing. "I didn't think CEOs had time for causes." Ethan chuckled, surprised by her wit. "We make time for what matters." Over the course of the evening, Ethan found himself genuinely enjoying their conversation. Claire was sharp, quick-witted, and refreshingly honest. She wasn't afraid to challenge him, and he found her perspective both intriguing and unsettling. By the end of the night, Ethan knew she was the perfect candidate for his plan. But as he walked her to her car, a small part of him wondered if this was more than just a strategy. A month later, Ethan proposed to Claire. He orchestrated the perfect moment, a candlelit dinner in a private rooftop garden, complete with a string quartet and a breathtaking view of the city. Claire was stunned, her eyes filling with tears as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Ethan said, his voice soft but firm. "Let me be the man who stands by your side." Claire hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "Yes." Ethan smiled, but as he held her close, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. He pushed it away. This was business. Nothing more. The wedding was a spectacle. Held in a grand cathedral, it was attended by celebrities, politicians, and the media elite. Claire looked stunning in her flowing white gown, her blindfolded eyes adding a unique beauty to her presence. Ethan played the part of the devoted groom perfectly, his arms steady around Claire as they exchanged vows. But as the ceremony ended and the applause filled the air, Ethan felt a strange hollowness in his chest. He had everything he wanted, a glowing public image, a flawless business deal. So why did it feel like something was missing? As he led Claire out of the cathedral, her smile lighting up the room, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if he had underestimated her. Because for the first time in his life, Ethan Walker felt like the tool in someone else's plan. The first few weeks of their marriage were a whirlwind of public appearances, carefully curated moments, and media coverage. For Claire, life had changed drastically. She had gone from her modest apartment to living in Ethan's sprawling penthouse, surrounded by luxury she'd never imagined. But despite the grandeur, there was an emptiness to her new life, a distance that she couldn't ignore. Ethan was kind, polite even, but there was a barrier between them that Claire couldn't seem to break through. He was often absorbed in his work, taking calls at all hours and spending long nights in his office. To the world, they were the perfect couple, but behind closed doors, Claire felt more like a trophy than a partner. One evening, Claire sat at the grand piano in the living room, her fingers gliding over the keys as she played a soft, melancholy tune. The music echoed through the penthouse, filling the space with a warmth that contrasted sharply with its cold, modern design. Ethan entered the room, pausing as he heard the music. "You play beautifully," he said, his voice breaking the silence. Claire stopped, turning her head toward him. "Thank you," she said softly. "It helps me think." Ethan nodded, stepping closer but keeping his distance. He watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I didn't know you played." Claire smiled faintly. "There's a lot you don't know about me." The comment hung in the air, and Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He had orchestrated this marriage for his own benefit, but Claire was a real person. A person with depth and a story he hadn't bothered to learn. "You're right," Ethan admitted. "I don't. But I'd like to." Claire turned toward him, surprised by his honesty. "Would you?" she asked, her tone cautious. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I would." The days that followed brought a subtle shift in their relationship. Ethan made an effort to spend more time with Claire, asking her about her work as a music teacher and the children she mentored. Claire, in turn, began to see glimpses of the man behind the CEO persona, a man who, beneath his arrogance, carried the weight of loneliness and self-doubt. But progress was slow. Ethan's habits were deeply ingrained, and his focus remained firmly on his company. The ongoing PR crisis consumed his energy, and while his marriage had done much to improve his public image, the company's financial troubles persisted. One night, after a particularly grueling board meeting, Ethan returned home to find Claire in the kitchen, preparing tea. She greeted him with a warm smile, but he barely acknowledged her as he walked past, loosening his tie. "Long day?" Claire asked, her voice gentle. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "You could say that." Claire poured 2 cups of tea and brought them to the table, sitting across from him. "Do you want to talk about it?" Ethan looked at her, surprised by the question. In his world, no one asked him how he felt. People wanted results, not vulnerability. But as he met Claire's steady gaze, he felt a strange urge to open up. "It's the board," he said finally. "They're pressuring me to make cuts, to downsize. They think it's the only way to stabilize the company." Claire frowned. "And what do you think?" Ethan hesitated, then shrugged. "I think they're probably right." Claire shook her head. "You don't sound convinced." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his frustration evident. "It doesn't matter what I think. The numbers don't lie." Claire reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Ethan, sometimes numbers don't tell the whole story. People do." Her words stayed with him long after they went to bed. The turning point came a few weeks later, during one of Claire's visits to a community center where she volunteered. Ethan had agreed to accompany her, though he had initially protested, citing his packed schedule. The center was a world away from Ethan's penthouse, a modest building filled with laughter and music. Children ran through the halls, their faces lighting up as Claire entered the room. Ethan watched as she greeted each child by name, her warmth and kindness radiating in a way that left him uncharacteristically quiet. One boy, a young pianist named Leo, caught Ethan's attention. Leo was shy, keeping to himself as the other children played. Claire sat beside him at the piano, encouraging him to play the piece they had been working on. "You've got this, Leo," Claire said, her voice soft but confident. "Just like we practiced?" Leo hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keys. Ethan could see the fear in the boy's eyes, the same fear he often felt when faced with the weight of his own expectations. But as Claire gently guided him, Leo began to play, his hands moving tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The room erupted in applause as Leo finished the piece, his face breaking into a wide smile. Ethan felt something stir within him, a realization that the world Claire inhabited was richer, fuller, and more meaningful than anything he had built. That night, as they drove home, Ethan broke the silence. "You're incredible with those kids," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Claire turned toward him, her smile warm. "They're incredible kids. I just help them see what they're capable of." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the road. "I don't think I've ever done that for anyone." Claire's expression turned thoughtful. "Maybe it's time you did." Her words stayed with him, and over the next few weeks, Ethan began to change. He started showing up at the community center more often, not just to accompany Claire but to actively participate. He spoke with the children, listened to their stories, and even helped organize a fundraiser to support their programs. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a sense of purpose that went beyond profits and power. He began to see the world through Claire's eyes, not as a series of transactions but as a tapestry of connections and possibilities. But change wasn't easy. Ethan's transformation was met with resistance, both from within and from those around him. His board of directors questioned his decisions, accusing him of losing focus. His employees, though initially skeptical, began to notice a shift in his demeanor, a willingness to listen, to collaborate, to lead with empathy. Claire, too, noticed the change. Ethan was no longer the cold, distant man she had married. He was becoming someone she could truly call a partner. But as their relationship deepened, so did the challenges they faced. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Ethan turned to Claire, his expression serious. "I need to tell you something," he said. Claire tilted her head, her brow furrowing. "What is it?" Ethan hesitated, then took a deep breath. "When I proposed to you, it wasn't just about us. It was about my company. I thought marrying you would help fix my image, help stabilize things." Claire's face fell, and Ethan felt a pang of regret. "I know how terrible that sounds," he continued quickly. "And I'm sorry. I've changed. You've changed me. But I needed to be honest with you." For a long moment, Claire didn't respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but tinged with sadness. "Thank you for telling me the truth, Ethan. But honesty doesn't erase the hurt." Ethan nodded, his chest tightening. "I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Claire stood, her hands trembling slightly. "Then start by proving it. Not with words, but with actions." The days that followed were some of the hardest of Ethan's life. He threw himself into his work, not for the company, but for the people it affected. He implemented ethical practices, reinstated jobs that had been cut, and worked to rebuild trust with his employees. At the same time, he devoted himself to Claire, showing her through his actions that she was more than just a part of his plan. She was his partner, his equal, and his greatest teacher. Slowly, the walls between them began to fall. Claire saw the sincerity in Ethan's efforts, and while the pain of his earlier betrayal lingered, she began to forgive him. Together, they built a life that was not perfect but real, a life rooted in growth, compassion, and love. Ethan's transformation wasn't a smooth journey. For every step forward, there seemed to be a step back. There were days when his old habits resurfaced. His impatience, his tendency to see problems as obstacles to be conquered rather than understood. But Claire's steady presence became his compass. Even on the days when her words stung with truth, Ethan found himself relying on her guidance. One of those moments came during a particularly challenging week. Ethan had spent hours in meetings, grappling with the fallout of his company's new ethical policies. Implementing changes to the supply chain had come at a financial cost, and some of his investors were growing restless. That evening, as he vented his frustrations over dinner, Claire listened quietly. When he finished, she placed her hand on his. "Ethan, I know this is hard," she said, "but doing the right thing isn't supposed to be easy. If it were, everyone would do it." Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words settling over him. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it," he admitted. "What if I fail? What if I let everyone down?" Claire's expression softened. "Failure isn't the end, Ethan. It's a part of the process. What matters is that you're trying. That's more than most people can say." Her words stayed with him as he returned to work the next day. Slowly but surely, Ethan began to see the results of his efforts. Employees who had once feared him now approached him with ideas and feedback. Clients who had distanced themselves during the scandal were beginning to return, impressed by his commitment to change. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, Ethan felt a growing sense of purpose. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Ethan turned to Claire with a question that had been on his mind for weeks. "What made you say yes?" he asked. Claire tilted her head, her brow furrowing. "When you proposed?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah. Why did you agree to marry me? You could have had anyone, Claire." "Better." Claire smiled faintly, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. "I don't think I've ever told you this," she said, her voice soft. "But I didn't say yes because of the way you made me feel. I said yes because I believed in the man you could become." Ethan's breath caught, her words cutting through him like a blade. "You believed in me before I believed in myself," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire reached for his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "And I still do." Ethan's efforts to make amends extended beyond his marriage and his company. Inspired by Claire's work at the community center, he began funding programs that supported children in underserved areas. He donated resources to schools, sponsored scholarships, and even launched a mentorship program within his company, pairing executives with young professionals from diverse backgrounds. At Claire's suggestion, Ethan also started attending her music classes. He was initially hesitant, unsure of how he could contribute, but the experience quickly became one of the highlights of his week. Watching the children light up as they played their instruments reminded him of the joy he had long forgotten, a joy he now found in the simplest of moments. One day, as Ethan watched Claire guide a group of students through a piano piece, he felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't pride or satisfaction, it was something deeper: gratitude. For the first time in years, Ethan felt truly alive. But even as their bond deepened, there were moments of tension. Claire's forgiveness had been hard-earned, but the scars of Ethan's earlier betrayals still lingered. One evening, as they prepared for a gala to celebrate the success of their community programs, an argument erupted. Ethan had been preoccupied with work, arriving late to dinner and brushing off Claire's attempts to discuss the evening's plans. When she finally confronted him, her voice was calm but firm. "Ethan, I need to know that I'm more than just an afterthought," she said. "This matters to you." Ethan froze, guilt washing over him. "Claire, you are the most important thing in my life," he said. "I know I don't always show it, but I'm trying." "I know you're trying," Claire said, her voice trembling. "But I need more than words, Ethan. I need actions." The argument left Ethan reeling. He spent the next few days reflecting on Claire's words, determined to prove his commitment. He started making small changes, leaving work earlier, planning date nights, and finding ways to show Claire how much she meant to him. Over time, those gestures became habits, and their relationship grew stronger. The gala was a turning point for Ethan in more ways than one. Held in a grand ballroom, the event was attended by philanthropists, business leaders, and media personalities. Ethan and Claire arrived hand in hand, their presence a symbol of unity and hope. As the evening unfolded, Ethan found himself drawn to the stories of the people their programs had helped. A single mother who had started her own business with the help of a scholarship. A teenager who had discovered a passion for coding through an internship at Walker Enterprises. A young musician who had found his voice in Claire's class. Each story reminded Ethan of the power of connection, the same power Claire had shown him when she had chosen to believe in him. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he took the stage with a mixture of nerves and gratitude. He looked out at the crowd, his gaze settling on Claire. 5 years ago, he began, I was a different man. A man who valued success over people, profits over principles. But someone saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Someone believed in me when I didn't deserve it. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. That person is my wife, Claire. She taught me the meaning of compassion, of resilience, of love. And because of her, I've learned that true success isn't measured by what you achieve, it's measured by what you give. The room erupted in applause, but Ethan's focus remained on Claire. She smiled up at him, her eyes shining with pride, and for the first time in his life, Ethan felt truly whole. In the years that followed, Ethan and Claire continued to build a life rooted in purpose and connection. Their programs expanded, touching lives across the globe. Ethan became a mentor to countless young professionals, using his story as a testament to the power of redemption. And through it all, Claire remained his guiding light, her unwavering belief in him shaping the man he had become. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of their home, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Ethan turned to Claire with a soft smile. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked. Claire nodded, her hand resting on his. "Every day." Ethan's gaze grew thoughtful. "I don't know where I'd be without you." Claire squeezed his hand, her voice gentle. "You'd be exactly where you're meant to be. Because, Ethan, the man you are today, that's all you." Ethan shook his head, his smile widening. No, Claire. It's us. Everything I am, everything I've built, it's because of you. As they sat together, the sounds of the city fading into the night, Ethan felt a quiet peace settle over him. He had spent so much of his life chasing success, but it was only now, with Claire by his side, that he understood what true success meant. And for the first time, Ethan Walker knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Ethan's growth became undeniable not just to Claire but to everyone who knew him. Over time, the man who once valued only profits began to see the world through a different lens. He spent more time mentoring his employees, learning their stories, and recognizing their contributions. For the first time in years, Walker Enterprises felt like more than just a business. It felt like a community. But true change is never without challenges, and Ethan was about to face one of the hardest tests of his life. It began with a letter. Claire had been experiencing unexplained headaches and fatigue for weeks but had brushed them off as stress. Ethan, ever observant now, insisted she see a doctor. A week later, the results arrived. As Ethan sat across from Claire in their living room, she held the letter in her trembling hands. He could see the fear in her expression, a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to show. "What does it say?" Ethan asked gently. Claire took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "They found a tumor. It's benign, but I need surgery to remove it." Ethan's chest tightened, the weight of her words sinking in. "Surgery?" he repeated, his voice laced with concern. Claire nodded, her composure faltering. "It's not urgent, but the doctor said it's better to address it sooner rather than later." Ethan reached for her hand, his grip firm but comforting. "We'll get through this," he said. "Whatever you need, I'll be there." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, her trust in him unwavering. "Thank you." The weeks leading up to Claire's surgery were a whirlwind of emotions. Ethan, who had once avoided vulnerability at all costs, now found himself confronting fears he couldn't control. He poured himself into supporting Claire, attending every doctor's appointment, researching the best surgeons, and ensuring she felt cared for in every way. But as much as he wanted to be strong for her, Ethan couldn't escape his own doubts. One evening, as he sat alone in his office, he found himself staring at a photo of Claire that sat on his desk. The thought of losing her, even for a moment, was unbearable. When Claire found him later that night, his face was buried in his hands, his usually composed demeanor shattered. She knelt beside him, resting her hand on his knee. "Ethan," she said softly, "what's wrong?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I'm scared of losing you." Claire's expression softened, and she reached for his hand. "I'm scared too," she said. "But we're not going to let fear win. We'll face this together, just like we've faced everything else." Ethan nodded, her strength grounding him once again. "Together," he repeated. The day of the surgery arrived, and Ethan stayed by Claire's side until the very last moment before she was taken into the operating room. As he sat in the waiting room, hours stretched into what felt like an eternity. He thought about all the moments they had shared, the laughter, the arguments, the quiet nights spent talking about their dreams. Every memory reminded him of how much she had changed his life, how much he needed her. When the surgeon finally emerged, Ethan shot to his feet, his heart pounding. "The surgery went well," the surgeon said with a reassuring smile. "Claire is in recovery now. She'll need time to heal, but she's going to be fine." Relief washed over Ethan, and for the first time in hours, he allowed himself to breathe. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Claire's recovery was slow but steady. Ethan took time off from work to care for her, ensuring she had everything she needed. It was a role he embraced wholeheartedly, and in those quiet moments, helping her to the couch, making her favorite tea, reading to her when she was too tired, Ethan discovered a new kind of fulfillment. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Claire turned to him with a smile. "You've changed, you know," she said. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a small smile. "Have I?" Claire nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You're not the same man I married. You're better." Ethan chuckled softly. "That's because of you." "No," Claire said, shaking her head. "It's because of you. You chose to change. I just gave you a reason." Her words stayed with Ethan, and as he reflected on his journey, he realized she was right. The man he had become wasn't just a result of Claire's influence, it was the result of his own willingness to grow, to face his flaws, and to become the person she had always believed he could be. As Claire regained her strength, life slowly returned to normal. But their relationship was stronger than ever, built on a foundation of trust, respect, and shared purpose. Together, they continued their work at the community center, expanding their programs to reach even more people. One day, as they prepared for a benefit concert hosted by the center, Ethan found himself reflecting on the past. The concert, which featured performances by the children Claire had mentored, was a celebration of resilience and hope, a testament to everything they had built together. As the music filled the air that evening, Ethan watched Claire interact with the children, her laughter and warmth lighting up the room. He felt a surge of pride, not just in her but in the life they had created. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized he had everything he had ever wanted, not wealth or power, but love, purpose, and connection. The final chapter of their journey came during a quiet moment at home. Claire had just finished playing a piece on the piano, and Ethan sat beside her, listening intently. "You know," Ethan said, breaking the silence, "I used to think success was about being the best, about winning at all costs." Claire tilted her head, her smile gentle. "And now, Ethan said, taking her hand in his, "I know that success is about who you become along the way. And I wouldn't have become the man I am without you." Claire's eyes glistened with tears, but she smiled, her voice steady. "I think we've both taught each other a lot." Ethan nodded, his chest tightening with emotion. "I love you, Claire. More than I ever thought I could love anyone." "I love you too," Claire said, her voice filled with certainty. As they sat together, the world outside faded away, leaving only the music, the memories, and the unshakable bond they had built. Their journey had been anything but easy, but it had brought them to a place of true understanding, a place where they could face whatever came next, together. And for Ethan Walker, that was the greatest success of all. As time passed, Ethan and Claire's life together began to take on a rhythm of its own, one rooted in mutual respect, shared purpose, and a growing love that had withstood trials both external and internal. They were no longer simply husband and wife. They were partners in every sense of the word, building a future together based on the very principles Ethan had once ignored. Their work with the community center flourished, expanding to new cities and reaching more people in need. Ethan's company, Walker Enterprises, now operated with a renewed sense of responsibility. Gone were the days of ruthless business practices. In their place was a culture of integrity, transparency, and compassion. The change didn't happen overnight, but it was happening, and it was something Ethan could be proud of. One afternoon, as Claire sat in her favorite spot by the window, sketching out ideas for the next music program, Ethan walked into the room holding a manila folder. His eyes were serious, but there was a hint of excitement in his expression. "Claire, we've got an offer," he said, setting the folder down in front of her. "From a major foundation. They want us to expand our work internationally." Claire looked up, her curiosity piqued. "Internationally?" she asked, leaning forward. "That's incredible. What's the catch?" Ethan smiled faintly, though his eyes remained thoughtful. "They're willing to provide the funding, but there's a lot of pressure. They want results, fast. We'll need to scale up quickly, which means more staff, more resources, more partnerships." Claire sat back, her brow furrowing. "That sounds like a huge responsibility. Are we ready for that?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, his fingers drumming on the table. "I think we could be. But I want to make sure we're not rushing into something just for the sake of growth. I want to do this right. If we're going to expand, it has to be sustainable." Claire smiled, her trust in him evident. "I agree. But if anyone can handle it, it's us. We've already proven that we can build something meaningful from scratch. This could be our chance to do even more." Ethan's heart swelled with pride. Claire's unwavering belief in him, sometimes more than he believed in himself, was something he had come to rely on. They had come so far together, and now they were faced with the opportunity to take their shared vision to a global scale. "Let's do it," he said, his voice steady with determination. "But we'll do it our way." No shortcuts? The decision to take on this new venture was not without its challenges. The expansion required them to make difficult decisions, to stretch their resources thin and test their limits. But throughout the process, Claire remained Ethan's grounding force. While he dealt with the logistics, the meetings, and the strategy, she focused on the heart of their mission: people. One day, as they sat together in a small conference room filled with international partners and stakeholders, Claire noticed Ethan fidgeting with the pen in his hand. His usual confidence was waning, his thoughts consumed by the weight of what they were about to take on. "I think you're overthinking it," Claire said softly, leaning over and gently placing her hand over his. "We've already done the hard work. This part is about showing people who we are." Ethan looked at her, his eyes tired but filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said, his voice low but sincere. "You don't have to," Claire said with a smile. "You've got me." The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. There were countless meetings with international leaders, strategizing sessions, and new partnerships to establish. Ethan's responsibilities grew exponentially, and the weight of the project threatened to take its toll. One evening, as Claire was putting away their dinner dishes, she noticed Ethan standing at the window, looking out over the city. She approached him quietly, her presence always calming to him, and stood beside him. "You've been working non-stop," she said softly. "You need to take a break." "But..." Ethan shook his head, though his exhaustion was apparent. "I can't, Claire. There's too much to do. If we don't act now, we'll lose the momentum." Claire reached up, gently turning his face toward her. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You can't pour from an empty cup." For a moment, Ethan was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. He had been so focused on building something bigger that he had neglected to take care of himself, to take care of them. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been so focused on everything else that I forgot what matters most." Claire smiled, her fingers brushing his cheek. "It's never too late to get back to what matters. But you need to be present with me, Ethan. Not just with the work. We've come so far together, but we need to keep reminding ourselves of that." Ethan closed his eyes, resting his forehead against hers. He had spent so much time chasing external success that he had almost lost sight of what truly mattered. His relationship with Claire, the foundation they had built, and the lives they were changing. "You're right," he whispered. "I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose you." Claire kissed him gently on the cheek. "You won't. We'll face this together, just like we always do." The following months brought challenges, but with them came moments of deep reflection and growth. Ethan and Claire found new ways to balance their work and personal lives, ensuring that their relationship remained the cornerstone of everything they did. Together, they built a thriving international network, not just of resources, but of genuine connections. Their work reached thousands, and they were able to provide opportunities for children, families, and communities around the world. As the organization grew, so did their understanding of the true power of what they had built. The expansion wasn't about numbers or statistics, it was about the people they touched, the lives they improved, and the hearts they reached. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, watching the sunset together, Claire turned to Ethan, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "You know, when I first met you," she said, "I never imagined that we'd be here, doing this. I thought we'd just be a story of two people, one blind, one cold-hearted." Ethan chuckled softly. "I don't know if I ever thought I'd change either." Claire smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I never gave up on you. And I think you never gave up on me." Ethan reached out, taking her hand in his. "We gave up a lot of things, Claire. But I think we found something better." Together, they watched the stars appear in the sky, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they had found the most important thing, each other. The months that followed the success of the international expansion brought new horizons for Ethan and Claire. They had gone from a man who lived for his career and a woman who had been overlooked in his world to a couple whose work together had touched the lives of thousands. Their shared vision of making a difference had become a reality. Yet, as their public influence grew, so did the challenges they faced. The demands of the expanding organization took their toll, on Ethan's energy, on their time together, and on their ability to stay present in each other's lives. Ethan often found himself at his desk long into the night, making calls, reviewing reports, and dealing with the complexities of managing a global enterprise. Despite the success, the weight of it all sometimes felt suffocating. The more he accomplished, the more he felt like he was falling behind, unable to keep up with the ever-increasing expectations placed on him by both the world and himself. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Ethan arrived home later than usual. He hadn't even noticed how dark it had gotten until he stepped into the penthouse. The quiet of the apartment was a stark contrast to the chaotic pace he had been living. As he dropped his briefcase by the door, he heard Claire's soft voice from the living room. She was sitting by the window, playing the piano as she often did when she needed to think. Ethan hesitated for a moment, watching her. The simplicity of her presence, her ability to create beauty from nothing, grounded him in a way his board meetings never could. He approached her slowly, and when she noticed him, she smiled, her fingers pausing on the keys. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice gentle, as though she knew something was off. Ethan sank into the chair beside her, his shoulders heavy with fatigue. "Long, too long. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Claire." She turned toward him, her eyes filled with concern. "What do you mean?" "I feel like I'm always chasing something," he confessed. "The business, the next big project, the next milestone. But I'm not sure I know what I'm chasing anymore. And I'm losing sight of everything that matters." Claire reached for his hand, her touch warm and grounding. "Ethan," she said softly, "I don't think it's about chasing something. I think it's about finding what you already have. What you've built with me. What we've built together." He looked at her, her words sinking in. "I'm so focused on the world I've created, on the empire, I forgot what's at the heart of it. What really matters." His voice cracked with the weight of his realization. Claire smiled, though there was a sadness in her eyes. "It's never too late to slow down, Ethan. To remember what's most important." Her words rang true. Ethan realized that in his attempt to change, to be someone he thought was better for the world, he had overlooked the one thing that had truly transformed him: his connection to Claire. The way she had always guided him with patience, how she had believed in him when he had no faith in himself. And most importantly, how she had always been there even when he had pushed her away. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the apology long overdue. Claire squeezed his hand. "There's nothing to apologize for. We've both been on a journey, Ethan. And it's not over yet." The following weeks were a turning point for Ethan. As he began to reassess his priorities, he took a step back from the relentless pace of the company. He started to delegate more, trusting his team to take on responsibilities he had once kept to himself. He made more time for Claire, not just in the evenings but during the day, taking walks together, sharing meals, and rediscovering the quiet moments that had once been the foundation of their relationship. Ethan also began working on a new initiative, one that was more personal, more reflective of the changes he had undergone. He created a mentorship program within Walker Enterprises, designed to give young professionals the opportunity to grow in a company that valued integrity, compassion, and collaboration above all else. His business was no longer just about profits. It was about building something meaningful for the next generation. But as the program gained momentum, Ethan found himself confronting a new challenge, one that threatened to derail everything he had worked for. One morning, Ethan was at a meeting with one of his largest investors. The man, a longtime supporter of Walker Enterprises, had always been a staunch advocate for Ethan's business model, which had relied on aggressive expansion and high-stakes financial maneuvers. But as the discussion progressed, Ethan began to sense a shift in the investor's tone. "Ethan," the investor said, his voice cool and calculated, "I've been following your recent changes, your ethical initiatives, your new direction with the company. I have to admit, I'm not sure where you're going with this. It's not the aggressive approach we signed up for." Ethan's heart sank. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying we don't have the same vision anymore," the investor replied. "You've taken too many risks, diverted too much from the original plan. It's time to think about your future, and the company's future. I think it's time for us to part ways." Ethan felt a wave of panic wash over him. His mind raced with the implications of the investor's words. Walker Enterprises was built on these kinds of partnerships. Without them, the company's future seemed uncertain. But as he sat there, the weight of the decision settled in. He knew what he had to do. "I'm not going back," he said firmly, his voice steady. "I've changed. And so has this company. I'm not interested in the same old path anymore. We're going to move forward with or without you." The investor's eyes narrowed. "This is your decision then?" Ethan stood, his decision made. "Yes, it is." Later that night, after the meeting, Ethan returned home, exhausted but resolute. He found Claire in the kitchen, preparing dinner, her movements fluid and graceful. For a moment, he just watched her, letting the quiet of the evening settle over him. When she turned to him, her eyes full of concern, he didn't wait for her to ask. "I did it. I told him we're not going back to the way things were." Claire smiled softly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and relief. "You made the right choice, Ethan." He stepped toward her, wrapping his arms around her. "I couldn't have done it without you. You're the one who taught me how to believe in something bigger than myself." Claire kissed him gently, her smile never fading. "You believed in yourself first. And that's what made all the difference." The decision to part ways with the investor was a gamble, but as the weeks passed, it became clear that Ethan had made the right choice. The company began to thrive in new ways, more organically, more sustainably. The mentorship program flourished, and Walker Enterprises became known for its integrity, its commitment to people, and its focus on making a positive impact in the world. Claire and Ethan's life together grew richer, more fulfilled. They spent more time traveling, visiting the new programs they had started around the world, and watching the seeds they had planted begin to grow into something real and beautiful. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of their penthouse, overlooking the city that had once represented everything Ethan had strived for, he turned to Claire with a thoughtful expression. "Do you remember when we started all this?" he asked, his voice low. Claire smiled, her fingers intertwined with his. "How could I forget? I knew from the start that this was only the beginning." Ethan squeezed her hand. "It's a beginning I never could have imagined. But I'm glad I'm living it with you." Claire gazed out at the horizon, the last rays of the setting sun painting the sky with vibrant colors. "And it's a beginning we're still building." As they stood together, in the quiet peace that only came from shared purpose, Ethan realized that the journey had been worth every moment. The struggle, the doubts, the pain, and the growth. What mattered was that they had done it together. And for the first time in his life, Ethan knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be.